Hello, my scientist friends. Get your science book out. We're ready for another unit in science. We finished up talking about the sun, the earth, and the moon. There's just one thing you're really supposed to know about that, and that's the earth rotates, and it causes day and night. There you go. And the length of shadows that we worked on there at the end of the week. You might see that on a test as well. So make sure you know those. And we're moving on to the next unit in your book, page 361. So go ahead and turn there in your science book now, page 361. We're going to be talking about weathering and erosion. If you have ridden your bike in your driveway at home, or maybe shot some basketball at the basketball court at home, have you ever noticed the cracks that are in the concrete? How do they get there? Is it from you jumping up and down on them, or what? And sometimes dirt gets in them and seeds get in them, and little grass or little weeds start growing in those cracks, and they seem to get bigger, don't they? Well, that's weathering and erosion. That's things that happen in nature. Weathering and erosion can break down, even rocks can be broken down and turned into dirt by weathering and erosion. So they are powerful forces in nature that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. Weathering is breaking something down, and erosion is washing something away. So remember that right now. If you have a sheet of paper, you might want to jot that down. Weathering is breaking something down, and erosion is washing it away. And so, again, there's two powerful forces in nature that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. Now, there's many things that can cause weathering and erosion. There's water. Water can wash away and weather parts of rock. If you ever go to a creek or maybe a river in the mountains and you see the stones, they're all smooth, aren't they? Those rocks in the water, they've been smooth. This little water runs over them, and they turn over and they turn over, and they get really smooth, and sometimes they're flat and they're good for skipping on the water. That rock has been weathered. So water can do it. Wind. Look right here. There was probably no water that made this big hole on page 361. It was probably wind that blew through there. And water, wind, ice. When water gets inside of the little cracks in your driveway and then it freezes, ice expands and it breaks the concrete. So those are three things. Gravity pulls down sometimes and causes landslides. And so those are some things we'll be talking about today. Again, we're on excuse me, page 361 in your science book. Our essential question today is, how do weathering and erosion shape Earth's surface? All right, so let's turn our page to 362 and answer this question. What can break a boulder? When you think of rocks, words like hard and solid may come to mind. You may think rocks can't ever break, but that's not true. Rocks can be cracked and crushed by mere wind and rain. So the roots of this tree broke apart this rock. This was once one solid rock, and the roots of the tree grew down to the cracks in the rock, and they grew bigger and busted the rock up. Kind of works like this with water too. When it rains, water can get into the cracks and rocks or your driveway, like I said. And when it freezes, it expands and it widens the crack. When water freezes again, it pushes the cracks in the rocks even wider. When this happens many times over and over, the rock can break apart. So just simple water, ice, can break apart a rock. The process of rocks breaking apart is called weathering. You know that's going to be on your vocabulary quiz today. You might want to underline that sentence. The process of breaking apart, process of rocks breaking apart is called weathering. That's breaking it apart. Mechanical weathering breaks rocks and soil into smaller pieces. Gravity can cause rocks to fall down a cliff and break apart. Flowing water can cause rocks to tumble and scrape against each other. Sand blown by wind can scrape against rocks. Living things can also cause weathering. A tree's roots can grow in a small crack in a rock, and as the roots grow, it can push the rock apart until the rock breaks. Animals may dig up rocks, causing the rocks to be exposed to wind and rain. Chemicals in water and rain that flow through and around rocks can also cause weathering. These chemicals can combine with rock and change it so that it crumbles and wears away. Look at the statues here on this page. Chemical weathering has already changed one of the statues. So chemical weathering. There's mechanical weathering, and there's chemical weathering. This is chemical weathering. You can see how it's the chemicals in the rain that has fallen is just eaten away at this concrete that the statue is made of. It's weathered. This one doesn't look so bad, does it? But weathering could change it over time. So weathering is breaking down rock. Rocks on the move. Don't rocks just sit around in the sun all day? No, rocks can move. Find out how. Weathering is the beginning of a series of changes that often occur to rocks on Earth's surface. The same wind and water that can cause weathering can also carry the bits of rock away. The process of moving weathered rock from one place to another is called erosion. There's another vocabulary word. Underline that in your book. The process of moving weathered rock from one place to another is called erosion. So let's not get those two words mixed up. We started off with this, but I want you to know it. You need to know the difference. Weathering is breaking the rock apart. Erosion is moving the broken pieces away, moving rock. So erosion is moving it. Weathering is breaking it down. So let's look here at number one, this picture here. The erosion of rock can be caused by many different natural processes. Moving water is one of the most common causes of erosion. The fast-moving water in this stream can shift or move large rocks near the top of the mountain. Together with gravity, water can cause the rocks to move downhill, like a little mountain stream like we were talking about. See how smooth those rocks are as the water is rushed over it? Number two here, rather. The water pulls the larger pieces of weathered rock along the river bottom. As the water slows down, it has less energy. It cannot move the largest rocks and pebbles. These are left behind as the water moves on. The dropping of weathered rock by wind or moving water is known as deposition. You need to underline that. So imagine with me, erosion is happening. And let's see what I have here. Anything? I'll just use my keys. And so water has got my keys, and it's rushing along and carrying my keys, but then it slows down, and it can't hold them up anymore. So my keys fall, but the water goes on. So my keys were deposited, or deposition is that process, okay? So as the water slows down, as it's carrying something along, but then it slows down. So say it's at the top of a mountain going downhill, it's going to go pretty fast, isn't it? But when it gets to the bottom of the mountain and levels out, that water's going to slow down, and whatever it's carrying down the hill is going to drop out of the water and onto the ground. So that would be deposition, okay? It deposits the rock that it's carrying somewhere. Let's move on to page 365. What happens next? These pictures show the Yahtzee River before and after a dam was built across the river. What effect did the dam have on the river and why? So here's the before. All right, so well, get out of the way there. The river's flowing along, but then a dam was built. So one of the things is that it caused some flooding right here, right? So this was just a little narrow river, but it flooded and formed like a little lake. Now that's how Cherokee Lake was formed, by Cherokee Dam, stopping the river. All right, as water in a river continues to slow down, more bits of weathered rock are dropped. This happens because slow-moving water has less energy than fast-moving water. So slow-moving water can carry only very small pieces of rock, such as sand and silt. These bits of rock are called sediment. So little bits of rock like sand and silt is called sediment. You'll want to underline that there, okay? Sediment is something like basically like little sand or dirt, little tiny pieces of rock maybe in the water can carry it when it slows down. And it's sediment. When rivers reach the ocean, they slow down even more. As they slow down, much of the remaining sediment in the water is dropped. Over time, the sediment piles up near the mouth of a river, and it forms a landform called a delta. I want you to go ahead and underline that. It forms a landform called a delta. A delta is all that sediment that's stacked up when the river slowed down. So let's go through the processes here. First, you've got weathering. So you've got this rock, and you've got water, rain, whatever, breaking it apart into pieces. So it was weathered, and it's sitting there in broken pieces. And then a river comes along and picks it up and moves it. That's erosion. It moved the broken pieces. Okay. And then when the water slows down, those broken pieces fall. The bigger pieces fall. That's deposition. And then the teeny tiny pieces that are still floating in the water, those little pieces are called sediment. And then when that river hits an ocean or a lake or something and really slows down, the sediment gets dropped or deposited, and it forms something called a delta at the end of the river. All right, 4 words right there, 4 important words we've already learned. So that was all about water causing weathering and erosion, but wind can cause it too. The wind is just moving air. So what can it do? A lot. Wind blows sand and other sediment away. Wind can carry away soil and other sediment. Where does all of it go? Some particles are not carried very far. Others can be carried thousands of miles away. Sand from the Sahara Desert in Africa is sometimes carried all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. That happened this past summer. Do you remember that? When the sand from the desert blew all the way across the ocean and the sky was kind of dark and it was kind of stormy looking. That was sand from Africa had blown to the United States just on the wind. So wind is pretty strong. It can do a lot of stuff. Winds may deposit a lot of sand in one area. Over time, the sand builds up and forms dunes. Sand dunes are often found near sandy beaches. So if you go to the beach and the wind's been blowing hard, that it can form a big dune, a sand dune. Don't see many at Myrtle Beach when I've been there. I went to Ocean City a couple of summers ago, and that's in Maryland. And it had a big sand dune. You went on a sand dune and go over a sand dune to get down to the ocean. And so that was really the first big sand dune I had seen at a beach, but they are at beaches sometimes when that sand blows in big piles. Have you been to Rock City in Chattanooga? There's a lot of erosion that's happened there. There's a little place where water has eroded between 2 very stiff, very big mountain cliffs, I guess, not mountain cliffs, but it's formed a valley. And anyway, it's very thin. It's called Fat Man Squeeze. The water has worn it down. And so, yeah, it squeezed me. It squeezes all fat men. It's hard to get through there, but I made it through. There's what made me think of Rock City was this right here, because at Rock City, there's one of these. There's a mushroom rock. This rock, called a mushroom rock, began as a big boulder, but wind slowly eroded the rock, leaving the mushroom shape behind. So how does that happen? Well, down here close to the ground, the wind's blowing and that sand. Have you ever felt sandpaper? It's kind of sharp, isn't it? If you rubbed it on your skin, it would rub your skin off. It'd make you bleed. Some sandpaper would. And so if you took sandpaper and you rubbed it on a rock or anything else, it's going to break it down. It's going to start chipping little tiny pieces away. And, well, there's not sandpaper blowing through the air, but there is sand blowing as the wind blows in this deserty looking area. That wind carrying sand, that sand has cut away over a long time, cut away at this rock near the bottom and a little bit less at the top, and formed this shape in a big boulder called a mushroom rock. Like I said, there is one at Rock City in Chattanooga. You can see not too far away, about 2.5 hours away. So wind can cause erosion and weathering. So can ice. Can you imagine an ice cube the size of a city? Some chunks of ice are even larger than that. What? Huge sheets of ice are called glaciers. There's a vocabulary word. Underline that sentence. Huge sheets of ice are called glaciers. Glaciers are found in very cold places. You may think because a glacier is made of ice, it doesn't move. However, the ice flows like a very slow river. As the glacier flows, it can pick up rocks as large as boulders. It also picks up the rock and soil under it, causing erosion. When a glacier begins to melt, the rock and sediment drop out. The drop-off sediment forms many different features, including hills called moraines. Moraines. Have you ever eaten a lemon meringue pie? Got little hills on the top of it. Yep. Glaciers can carry dirt and scoot dirt into big hills called moraines like that. Look at this carved by ice. This mountain is just carved away by the big glacier. moving slowly down the mountain. That's Glacier Bay, Alaska. So this big, huge sheet of ice right here looks like a slowly moving river. That's a glacier. It's made of ice, and it's moving very slowly, carving away that mountain. And here's a glacier has slowly moved over this rock here. You can see the weathering it's left behind and erosion. Gravity is also a force that can cause weathering and erosion. We're on 368 in your book. Gravity pulls a ball thrown into the air down. It pulls you down. It pulls rain and snow down. It can even pull rocks down. Just as gravity causes a ball to fall back to the ground, it causes rocks and sediments to slide down mountains and cliffs. Gravity can even cause huge chunks of rock and soil to slide down a slope all at once. This is called a landslide. Landslides happen a lot in mountain ranges. Over there, as you go on, if you go to the beach, you've got to go through the mountains before you get into North Carolina. And right in that area, there's a lot of landslides because the interstate is built right through these steep mountains. And when it rains a lot, then sometimes the dirt breaks loose and comes down into the interstate and blocks the road. You got to go a different way to the beach or to get to North Carolina when there's a landslide. A hill's slope affects how gravity will act on it. If the slope is steep, rocks are much more likely to fall than if it's not steep. If you're in the mountains too on the road, you see that a lot of times you'll see a sign that says, watch for falling rock. Yeah, gravity's pulling that rock down the hill. So look at these three different slopes here, the steepness. If you had a little Hot Wheel car, which one would it roll fastest on? Obviously this one, right? It's more steep. It's going to go right down there, almost fall. This one not so fast, and this one would be the slowest. So the steepness of a hill or a mountainside would affect how much gravity might pull, how much of a chance of a landslide there might be. So these kind of form angles, don't they, like we've been talking about in math. So a steep, if you look at the angle this forms right here, a steep slope forms a big old obtuse angle. This one not so obtuse, but still obtuse. This one still obtuse, but less steep. Water. Water carries dirt down the drain when you wash your hands. It also carries rocks and sediment down a river or along a beach. Flowing water has energy. It does, doesn't it? Try to go stand out in the ocean. Some of those waves will knock you down. That energy can carry sediment down a river. Ocean waves have a lot of energy. Waves crash on rocks along a shore, causing rocks to break apart. The waves cut cliffs and cause caves to form. Waves can also carry away sediment and deposit it in other places. Over time, a beach may form. So if we look at this, the shape of this rock is called a sea arch. It forms when waves have come in and broke down that rock. They eroded the rock, cutting all the way through it. So they weathered it, they broke it down, and then they carried it away. Washed away by water, erosion. Now, you may not think about this, but this has asked a good question here. Do plants protect the soil? Well, sure they do. Think about those roots that grow down in the ground. They hold that dirt together. They hold it in place. So plants actually protect the soil from weathering and erosion. Let's read what happens here in the Great Plains. What is this a picture of? It looks pretty scary. The Great Plains of the United States can be very dry, windy area. Grasses that naturally grow there keep moisture in the soil. Their roots hold the soil in place. In the early 1900s, many families made their living in the Central Plains by farming. They deeply plowed hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land where natural grasses had grown before. In between crop seasons, fields of loose soil were left exposed to the wind. During the 1930s, the plains experienced severe drought. The bare soil turned to fine, dry dust. Then the high wind blew the soil away in gigantic dust storms. Clouds of dust traveled as far as New England, and even out over the Atlantic Ocean, dust fell like snow, and this says a dust storm can travel up to 75 miles per hour. How would you like to be in that house and see a bunch of dust coming blowing at you? You'd have to get inside, or it'd be hard to breathe, wouldn't it? So out in the plains, as it's talking about, it's very flat. It's not like it is around here. very flat, not many trees, not a whole lot of hills. It's just flat land. And so farmers had dug up the grass that grew there to grow crops. Nothing wrong with that. But then there was a drought and their crops didn't grow. So it was just bare soil, no plants on it because there was no water to make the plants grow. And that dry soil just turned into dust. And then the wind blew and caused these dust storms. The dust storms occurred regularly for years. Wind erosion stripped away much of the soil that had made the region good for farming. Families had to move away and find other ways to survive. Many starved and suffered terribly hard times. That region of the country became known as the Dust Bowl. It taught a valuable lesson about erosion problems caused by removing all the plants from an area. Now look at this. This looks neat, doesn't it? It's pretty. Now farmers plant different crops at different times to keep the soil covered year-round. In yards and small fields, fence rows and lines of trees break the wind. Adding plants to hillsides protects the soil from the water erosion as well as from wind. So now if they've got corn growing in the fall and then they want to dig it up, they might grow something else in the winter, have something down in the winter and then something in the spring. Anyway, they keep a crop growing all the time to protect the soil and keep it in one place. When I grew up on a strawberry farm, we would rotate our crops. And so the fields that the strawberries were in, they would either have strawberries in them, or if it was time to rotate the crop, we would plow up the strawberries and then we would plant one of two things. It would either be soybeans or rye. Soybeans put a lot of nitrogen back in the ground. And then the rye, it's like a big tall grass, and we would cut it. But we would always have crops growing too. We never left a field bare. We always kept crops growing on the strawberry farm, even when there weren't strawberries in the field. So let's sum it all up. This has been kind of a long lesson. Thank you for listening. Summary: over time, wind, water, ice, gravity, plants, and animals cause rocks to break down into smaller pieces. How did the animals do it? Remember, they might have dug up a rock out of the ground. Bits of broken down rock or sediments are eroded away by such agents as wind and flowing water. So remember, there's weathering, breaking it down, erosion, by moving it from one place to another. Eventually, the sediments are deposited. Deposited sediments form landforms such as deltas and sand dunes. So let's see what happens. It's kind of a cause and effect chart here. So water enters the cracks in a rock and freezes into ice. What happens next? Do you remember? Well, that ice expands and it starts breaking apart the rock. It makes the crack bigger. And eventually it gets bigger and bigger and that rock can actually fall apart. So the effect of that would be the breaking down, the weathering of a rock. So we've got an effect here. Sediments are deposited at the mouth of a river and form a delta. Why do they get deposited at the mouth of a river? Well, the water slows down, right? The water carrying the sediment slows down, so it drops it and forms the delta. Next page. All right, you're going to need to look for these vocabulary words. I want you to put them in the right spot. Practice it in your book. Excuse me, I got a little scratchy throat today. Page 373 in your book. Make sure you do this. I won't grade it, but you need to do it because you are going to have a quiz assignment today on these 7 words. And if you can do this in your book, you'll already know the answers. So do this first before you go do your assignment. All right. What are some things that can weather rock? Well, what have we learned? Water can, ice can, wind can, animals can. What else have we talked about? I think that covers most of it. Explain how a plant can cause a rock to weather. Well, let's look at this picture here. So how does a plant make a rock break down? Well, the roots of a tree or the roots of some plant grows down into the crack in a rock. And as those roots get bigger and bigger, they start breaking the rock into pieces. Number 4 says, circle the body of water that can erode the largest sediments. So let's think about that. Which one would cause the most erosion? You've got 3 choices. You've got like a pond. you've got like a little river flowing, or you've got this huge waterfall. Now, I want you to think about the amount of energy in each one. How much energy is in a pond? The water's just kind of sitting there, isn't it? There's a little bit more energy in a river because it's moving, it's flowing. But think about a waterfall. Think about all of that energy because the water is falling. As it's falling, it's breaking down the rocks on the wall it's touching. And when it hits the water, it's causing a crash. If there's any rocks there, it's breaking them. So definitely a waterfall would erode the largest sediments. It would break things down more because there's more energy in that water crashing. For each landform shown, write the words that tell what caused the landform to form. Choose from the list of words below. So we're choosing wind, ice, gravity, or water. So how about sand dunes in the desert? That'd be wind, wouldn't it? The wind blew those sand dunes. Obviously, this is one of those sea arches we looked about. The waves have crashed into this cliff and broken it down and formed a little sea arch. So that was water. Okay, let me see what's right here. Oh, this is a landslide right here. The land is breaking down and falling down there. That's gravity. It could have been loosened by some water, but gravity eventually pulled it down. Okay, this right here, it looks like a very cold place. There's grooves along a rock. What did we read about that cuts grooves in a rock? That was a glacier, and glaciers are made of ice. Okay, here is a river. It's breaking apart at the ends here, flowing into a water, flowing into an ocean or lake or something. That would be water, obviously. And here's one of those mushroom rocks. Remember, the wind was blowing the sand and cutting that mushroom rock into that shape. Okay, turn over to 376 for each landform below. Write whether the landform was formed by erosion or deposition. Okay, erosion is moving it. Deposition is dropping it. So let's see here if we can figure out what this is. So this says a river running through a deep canyon. Okay, well, a river is running through a canyon. So it's moved, it's cut away the dirt to form the canyon to make the canyon deeper. So that's erosion. This one, sand dunes on the beach. Well, that sand has been dropped there, hasn't it? So that's deposition. A bunch of sand has been deposited in a big hill. A cave in an ocean cliff. That's erosion, isn't it? It's washed a hole to form a cave. And a glacier. That's erosion. It's eroding those grooves in the rocks. Okay. All right. And that's the end of the lesson. I want you to go back, make sure you do your vocabulary on this page right here. Make sure you can match these words with those 7 definitions, and then you'll have an assignment to do the same. All right. See you later.